Most people explain it the same way. You're tired. Your brain fills in the gaps. Peripheral vision is playing tricks on you. And that's normal. But then there are the stories. The stories are much harder to ignore. Where people don't just catch something out of the corner of their eye. They see it. Standing in a doorway, at the end of a hallway, sometimes in a room that they're already in. And they're not asleep. They're not dreaming. They're fully awake, fully aware. And for a moment, they're not alone. Tonight on the Midnight Drive, we're talking about shadow people. Most people associate shadow figures with sleep paralysis. That's the framework. You wake up, your body won't move, your brain is still partially dreaming. And in that state, it creates something. A presence, a shape, something that feels like it's in the room with you. That is documented. That's something that we can point to. But then there are the stories that don't fit that pattern. The ones that include people that aren't asleep. They're not waking up. They're not in that in-between state. They're standing. They're walking. They're fully aware. And something shows up anyways. Now, before we go any further, it's important to ground all of this. Some of the stories in this episode are direct listener experiences. Others are built from patterns that show up across a lot of different accounts. Not to prove anything, just to sit with what keeps showing up. Because when enough people describe something in similar ways, it becomes harder to ignore completely. Even if the explanation is still unclear. There's a kind of story that shows up a lot. It's not a dramatic story or an extreme story by any stretch. It's just specific enough to feel off. Someone wakes up in the middle of the night. Not because they're scared, it's just routine. Go to get some water, go into the bathroom, walking around the house, and everything feels normal. Until it doesn't. Not because something moves, because something is already just there. Maybe it's at the end of the hallway, standing still. And that's usually the first thing that people notice. It's not the shape, it's not the detail, it's the stillness. Because it doesn't match the moment. If it really were a person, there would be movement, a shift, a reaction. There would be something. But there isn't. It just holds. And your body reacts before your mind does. The chest tightens. The hands feel like they need to do something. Maybe turn on a light, say something, step back. But there's this moment where none of that happens. You just stand there, looking at something that doesn't move in a space where something should move. And that's where it all starts to feel so wrong. Again, it's not extreme, it's just misaligned. There's another version of the same thing that starts in a more familiar place. Peripheral vision. You're walking through a room and you catch something out of the corner of your eye. Movement. A shift. And that's pretty easy to explain. Your brain is filling in the edges of your surroundings. It creates motion where there isn't any. That's pretty normal. It's pretty standard. But sometimes people don't turn right away. They just watch it from the edge. When they do, it doesn't disappear. It holds. And that's when the explanation starts to slip away. Because now it's not just a flicker. It's a shape. There's a height to it. There's a kind of outline that stays consistent. And then there's that moment where you have to decide whether or not to look directly at it. Because as long as it stays in the edge of your sight line, it can still be explained. But once you look straight at it, the explanation either holds or it doesn't. And when people do look, it's gone every time. But that gap, that moment where it was there, that's the part that sticks in our memories. And then there are the stories that are harder to place anywhere because they don't follow the usual pattern. They don't start in sleep. They don't start in the periphery. They don't fade slowly. They just happen. Someone sitting in a room, middle of the day, lights on, nothing unusual. And they notice something in a doorway. Not clearly at first, just enough to register. So they look. And there it is, a dark figure. Human-shaped, standing still. And for just a second, it feels like it could be explained. We've got lighting, we've got contrast. Perhaps something is casting a shadow. But then, it does move. Just once, a solitary step. And then, as fast as it appeared, it's gone. Not fading, not turning, just gone. And that moment, that one moment, ends up being the part that's hardest to explain away. Because it happens after attention locks in. After the brain has already confirmed that something is there. And then it disappears anyways. We had a listener story here on the Midnight Drive in a previous episode. We called the listener Marcus, and he told us about when he was a child, and he vividly remembered he was, I think, 6 or 7 years old. He was looking out the front door. It was storming. It was raining. His parents had gone out. There was a babysitter there that was watching him, and he could see across the street. It looked like the outline of a person. Didn't have any detailed features. It was a shadow person leaning up against a light pole with a wide-brimmed hat, fitting all of the profiles of not just a shadow person, but also the Hat Man. He said that it shook him up so much in his young age that it's still one of his most vivid memories, even 50 years later. That one has stuck with me. I don't know that I've heard a shadow person story that vivid ever, and especially from a person that was that young when the experience occurred. It's wild. Have you ever had an experience with a shadow person? Have you ever seen the Hat Man out of the context of sleep paralysis? We would love to hear about it. Please let us know in the comments below wherever you're listening. And feel free to drop us a line at our hotline, 402-610-2836. Leave us a message. Tell us your story. We would love to hear it. right here on the Midnight Drive. So there is another layer to all of this that shows up a lot but doesn't always get talked about directly. Stress. Not just being busy, not just being tired, but that kind of sustained stress where your mind never really settles. Where even when you're resting, your body isn't fully letting go. Where something is always running in the background. You don't always notice it at first. It just becomes normal. That tightness in your chest. That low-level alertness. That feeling like you're never really fully off. Because a lot of people describe these experiences showing up in those seasons when sleep is inconsistent, when things feel off, when there's something in the background that hasn't been resolved. Maybe it's something you're carrying, even when you're not actively thinking about it. And I've had my own experiences with sleep paralysis, and for me, they didn't randomly show up. They showed up during those kinds of seasons, when everything felt tight. Family tension, life tension, trying to figure things out while feeling like I was being watched, evaluated, assessed. And that kind of pressure does something to your system. It doesn't just stay in your thoughts. It moves. You can feel it in your body, in your chest, in your stomach, in your hands. There's a heat, a restlessness, that sense that something needs to resolve, but hasn't. I remember somebody once described anxiety as feeling like your brain has to pee, and feeling that all the time. All the time. And when your body doesn't fully come down from that feeling, even when you're laying still, something about that awareness stays active, alert, not in a focused way, just on. Kind of like a computer in sleep mode. It's not fully shut down, it just takes the press of a key on the keyboard, or you move the mouse a little bit, and it's right there, ready to go again. And that's the space where a lot of these experiences seem to show up. It's not proven, but it is consistent. That overlap between the body trying to rest and awareness not fully letting it do so. And there's other overlaps too. Sleep disruptions. Things like not breathing normally at night. Waking up more than you realize. There's even medications. People mention different variables. They're not always the same ones, but there's enough overlap that it starts to form a pattern. And that pattern doesn't explain everything, but it explains something. It explains why the experience doesn't feel random. It shows up when the system is already off balance. Even if it's just ever so slightly off balance. Then, of course, there's the layer of belief. Because once somebody experiences something like this, they have to make sense of it. It's in our nature. And the interpretation usually follows what they already believe. Some people will say it's neurological, a misfiring of the brain. It's a state overlap. It's something internal. Some say psychological. Maybe it's stress, maybe it's trauma, maybe it's the mind externalizing something it can't process directly. And of course, some say spiritual. That there's literally something else in the room. something they encountered, not something they created. And some go further than that. They describe it as something dark, something intentional, something that knows that it's there. And you can see that in how people talk about it. The language shifts. The tone shifts. But when you strip that away, the experience itself doesn't actually change as much. And that's where it gets interesting, because you end up with different explanations attached to very similar moments. It's the same shape, it's the same stillness, it's the same feeling in the body. But it has a different meaning. And maybe that's just how the mind works, trying to categorize something unfamiliar, trying to place it somewhere that makes it easier to live with. Because leaving it unresolved is uncomfortable. Sitting in the gap without an answer, without a clear explanation, that's harder. But even then, there's still something that doesn't fully settle, because the explanation might make sense, but the feeling doesn't always follow. And that's the part people come back to. Not what they think happened, but what it felt like. That moment where something didn't line up quite right, where they were fully awake, fully aware, and something was present that shouldn't have been there. And the body reacted before it could be explained. That drop in your stomach, that tightness in your chest, that instinct to move, even when nothing is happening. And that reaction sticks much longer than the image itself. Most of the time, these experiences are brief, a few seconds, maybe longer, and then they're gone. The room goes back to normal. Nothing there, nothing to point to. And that makes it easy to explain, easy to move past. But the feeling doesn't always leave right away. Because even if you understand what might have caused it, there's still that moment that doesn't completely fit, that doesn't have a concrete answer. And maybe it was your brain filling in a gap, trying to make sense of something internal. That's possible. But it doesn't fully explain why it feels the way that it does, or why the shape keeps showing up the same way for people who have never met. They've never compared notes. They never expected to see anything at all. And maybe it doesn't mean anything. Or maybe it's just one of those things that doesn't fully resolve. Something just beyond our comprehension. It just happens. In the spaces where your body is trying to rest. But your awareness is still holding on.